Hey, kia ora! Welcome to today's edition of Genealogy and History. It is May 10th. What exciting things happened on this day back in history? We're going to be covering 1503 to 1994 with our events and people today. And we're going to be covering things like bacon, the Mississippi River, golden spikes, tunnels, and Amadeus. Ooh, it's a little bit of a mix-up. So, and then as always, if at any time, we're always asking you who in your family tree appears in today's events in history. Do you have, sorry, I'm slowing down on my seat for some reason. Do you have somebody in your tree that participated in events in history is actually mentioned on this day in history? So let's get in there, let's dig it out and find out. Oh, and if you need assistance with starting your tree, finding that elusive thread for that elusive relative, just set up a free consultation call at helenconnects.com. And here we go, May 10th. Here we go, 1503. On May 10th, 1503, Christopher Columbus, wow. Already getting problems with the voices. Christopher Columbus discovers the Cayman Islands. Wow, I've been to the Caymans. They're pretty cool islands. It's quite nice there, quite relaxing. In 1534, French navigator Jacques Cartier reaches Newfoundland, explored and claimed what is now Canada for France. Cartier was the first European to describe and map the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the shores of St. Lawrence River. He named the country of Canadas after the Iroquois names for the two big settlements he saw at Stadacona, which is now Quebec City, and Hochelaga, which is now Montreal Island. Always interesting to find these things out. I love these explorer things and how they explored and what they discovered. Then somebody else tootles along later and makes another discovery. Then somebody else comes along and maybe is brave enough to actually get off the ship and go land. It's always interesting finding out how countries were discovered, who discovered them, what their background was, and why things were named what they were named. In 1643, the Essex County, Massachusetts, is founded, which contains the town of Salem, as in which the notorious witch trials occurred in 1692. In 1652, John Johnson, a free African American, is granted 550 acres in Northampton, Virginia. That's a lot of land. Love it. Yes. I wonder what he did with the land. Let's see, their cotton, would it be tobacco they would have done there in Virginia? Tobacco? Or was it cotton? I have to go look that one up. See what he used the 550 acres for. Would have been interesting to see what industry he came up with. I'm always interested on the different industries that they had around those times, especially on those that had the big land. Were they breeding cattle? Were they breeding horses? Because Virginia's got a good horse area. I'm trying to remember where Northampton in Virginia is. But I think there's also tobacco was grown in Virginia along with cotton. I'm trying to think what other agricultural stuff was there. It'd be interesting to go see what he found. In 1655, Jamaica was captured by the English. And here comes the first of our ones. In 1676, Bacon's Rebellion begins with the frontiersmen versus the Virginia government. I don't even know what the Bacon Rebellion is. I didn't get a chance to go look that one up, but it's on my list to go look up and check out because I'm trying to figure out who is Bacon and what was his rebellion against. So in 1775, this Second Continental Congress convenes in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and issues paper currency for the first time. And also at that same meeting, they named George Washington as the Supreme Commander. They were very busy that day. Let's see, what else we got here? Oh, yes, in 1797, the first U.S. Navy ship, the United States, is launched. In 1823, the first steamboat to navigate the Mississippi River arrives in Fort Snelling. Now, I have to say, every time I have to type out the word Mississippi, and even when we went driving across the Mississippi a couple of times, I'm always going, am double BI. Does anybody else do that? It's like when you got to screw something on, you go left, is it righty tighty, lefty loosey, righty tighty when you're turning something? And I'm like, I do that every time I connect my hose connections to and from the RV and all that. But every time I spell Mississippi, I'm going double BI. So, yeah, just throw that in there. The following year, in 1824, the National Gallery in London opens to the public in its temporary home in the townhouse in Pall Mall. Now, Pall Mall is one of those little squares that's right next to Mayfair on the Monopoly board. I don't know where it actually is in relation to Mayfair in London, but that's where the thing was. In 1869, a golden spike was driven, completing the first U.S. transcontinental railroad at Promontory's summit in Utah, connecting the Central Pacific Railroad with the Union Pacific. The last spike really was golden. It was made out of 17.6 carat copper alloyed gold and weighed 14.03 troy ounces, which is 436 grams. It was a gift of San Francisco financier David Hughes and can still be viewed at the Cantor Arts Center in Stanford University. There you go. Who knew they actually used a real golden stake for that last one, completing that thing? That's pretty impressive. In 1872, Victoria Woodhull became the first woman nominated for U.S. presidency by the Equal Rights Party at Apollo Hall in New York City. Now, I found this kind of interesting because I know New Zealand was the first country in the world to give women the right to vote in 1893, but this is 1872. And US-wide, women were not given the vote until, I think it was 1920. But there were a couple of states that did allow, like I know New Jersey was one of the states at the time that did give women the right to vote. But they also had stipulations on what women could and could not vote. So I thought that was very interesting that the woman became the first woman nominated for a U.S. presidency by Equal Rights Party in New York City in 1872 when they didn't even have the right to vote. So I thought that was kind of interesting, kind of an interesting little twist in history there. In 1879, a meteor falls near Esterville in Iowa. In 1881, the lighthouse on Ameland begins operation. And I've got to go figure out where that one is because I didn't look it up. I'm not supposed to. I had a little list down here. It's a little list over here that I was meant to go look up these different things so I can give you some more information. In 1883, the first appendectomy was performed in North America by Abraham Groves in Canada. I wonder whoever did the first appendectomy, like worldwide. Who even thought that they had to cut somebody open at that area and pull out that appendix? It was kind of interesting to think of these things. In 1893, the Imperial Institute in London opens. It has moved a few times. It was part of the Imperial College, and now it's now called, I think it's the Commonwealth Institute it's part of now, and it's moved from its original location to a different location now. In 1906, Italian King Victor Emmanuel and Swiss President Ludwig Forer opened Simplon Tunnel, and the tunnel is through the Swiss Alps connecting Italy and Switzerland. It's 12.5 miles long, or 20 kilometers, and it is one of the longest tunnels in the world. And when you see the pictures of it, there's actually two tunnels next to each other, so they can have trains going in each direction, which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, it's one of the longest train tunnels in the world. I think it's one of the longest, they said. In 1910, the first aircraft air display was held in Hendon, England. And I was sort of like, oh, I would have so loved. I love my warbirds. I don't care what era they're from. I love watching. I've seen a triple wing fly. I've seen a double wing fly. And then, of course, you've got your Messerschmitts and your Spitfires and your Corsairs and Mustangs and all those wonderful, wonderful aircraft. And I know most of those didn't come along till later, but in 1910, they had their very first aircraft air display. I thought that was so cool. And many years later, I still enjoy going to air shows. In 1915, Canadian physician Clooney McPherson first presents his gas mask invention to the British War Office. It's 1915 they were doing that. Wow. 1922, Dr. Ivy Williams is the first woman to be called to the English bar. So that means that she becomes a lawyer, for those that don't know what that means. In 1924, J. Edgar Hoover is appointed head of the FBI. In 1930, in Adler, Chicago, the first U.S. planetarium opens. Have you ever been to a planetarium? I love those. You get to lay back in those chairs, you got the starry skies above you, and they take you on these journeys through space. It is so cool. And the first one opened in Adler, Chicago, in 1930. Wow, that's awesome. In 1940, Winston Churchill succeeds Neville Chamberlain as the British Prime Minister. He was a very interesting man, Mr. Winston Churchill. He gave some great speeches. He was a very interesting man. He got kicked out of Parliament at one point. Then they came and begged him to come back because he told them what to be on the lookout for, and they wouldn't listen to him. And when it happened, they kind of went and begged him to come back. He was also not a bad painter as well. He did some good landscapes and things. In 1950, the first Netherlands to US telex was sent. Now, I thought telex, what's it equivalent to today? And a telex was a major method of sending written messages electronically between businesses in the post-World War II period. And when I was looking up the telex machine and stuff, I was like, they were texting. Because it was just little short messages. They were texting people back in 1950 with a telex. Yes, and they had these little telex printers. They're like, think of a, kind of looks like the printers that you get for receipts. That's kind of what the printer for a telex looks like, the actual printer portion area. It kind of looks like that with the rolls of paper. But later on, the telexes were phased out for fax machines. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Back in 1950, they were texting from the Netherlands to the US. Wow, that's awesome. The early version of texting was a telex. There you go. There's your history lesson for the day. In 1960, the U.S. atomic submarine USS Triton completes the first submerged circumnavigation of the globe. It doesn't say how many days it took them, but I thought that would have been interesting to find out. That they were underwater, see how long they were actually submerged underwater. It was the first submerged navigation. In 1963, Decca signs Rolling Stones on the advice of the Beatle George Harrison. So that's how the Rolling Stones got signed up and got their move, was that they were advised to do that by George Harrison from the Beatles. Pretty cool. Always interesting how people get their start in things. In 1983, the TV sitcom Laverne and Shirley last airs on ABC TV. I loved that show. That was a really cool show. That was a spin-off from Happy Days. In 1986, this has got to be one of my favorite songs. Rock Me Amadeus by Falco hits #1 on the UK pop chart. That was their Amadeus thing. Rock me Amadeus, Amadeus, Amadeus. And 1994, so we have two events that happened on this day in 1994. Barbra Streisand began her first concert tour in 30 years. And I thought, I didn't think she was old enough to have not had a concert in 30 years. That was my first thought in 1994, that she hadn't joined a concert since the mid-60s. And I was like, how old was she in the 60s? Because to have 30 years, I'm like, oh my gosh, she looks amazing. She looks incredible. She still sounds incredible. And I'm like, 30 years between her last concert and this concert. That just blew my mind. I didn't think she was old enough to have had a 30-year gap between concert tours, sorry. And then on this day, and the other thing that happened on this day in 1994 is Nelson Mandela was sworn in as the South Africa's first black president. So that's what happened on this day in history, May 10th, through the years from 1503 to 1994. Who in your family tree appears in any of these incidences? As anybody in your family tree actually mentioned as one of the people in in today's points in history? And if you need assistance with, getting your tree started or finding that elusive thread that you're looking for, and those elusive threads are fun. When I find one, it just keeps, let it gently pull them and just go off. And yes, they will venture off into other little rabbit holes and things like that, but you just got to stay the course. Genealogy is not a fast thing. It is something that takes time, and it is the ultimate puzzle because it will never, ever be fully completed. You will always have holes in your family tree that you will not, but no matter how much research you do, you will not be able to complete your family tree. It is the ultimate puzzle. But it's really cool to see how much of your puzzle you can actually put together. So if you need help getting the puzzle of your family tree started, or helping find those elusive people in your tree, then please go to helenconnects.com and set up a time for us to get together and have a chat so that we can help get you started on your family tree research and make some connections to some places and times in history. Have a super fantastic sparkling day, and we will catch you back here tomorrow, same time at 12:35 for May 11th.